sandpaper factory since it seemed sand was in abundance.
One thing that we all had in common at Hanford, it was drilled into us from day one, was security.
Oh, yeah.
And everywhere you turned, they'd have different logos and signs. And we didn't know what was going on, but we were warned not to talk about it. If anybody asks you, what do you do at Hanford? Well, I don't know, I just work.
Nobody knew what to say anyway because it was so hush.
No one
Nobody knew.
It was just such a different thing. Of course, I'd come from Tacoma, and it's crowded in Tacoma, but then there was streets and sidewalks and everything, and there wasn't in Hanford. They had some boardwalks down, like in front of the stores, but there wasn't sidewalks. And the buses ran all the time. The buses kind of ran in a circle all the time, and the trailer camp was on one side, the barracks were over on the other side, and then sort of in between was where the commissary was. Well, we all wondered what we were doing, but we were told by the government, you know, this is for the good of the country, and we were all for the good of the country, you know, and so we were willing to do it.
The trailer park itself was set up as a fully functional city. At its peak, it boasted more than 13,000.
And not to wash, it was just to hang out. It was someplace that was covered, you know, that you could get in out of the wind and rain and so forth.
The trailer people, I think, adapted to life around here really easy. I'm not really sure why, but I think they did better than the other people that moved into a house right away. It was really tough on women around here. It was real hot, there wasn't air conditioning in those days, and so it was generally the woman's idea to move out of town. In a lot of cases, the men were willing to put up with the misery because the money was good. But some of the life was so tough that the women, they didn't want to put up with it. And so, if you want to be married with me, we're leaving right now. So.
People came from every state in search of work. Most were unprepared for the desert conditions, for the secrecy, the lines, the heat and dust made family life far from the ordinary. A walk through the streets read like a history lesson. Streets were named for U.S. generals, including Doolittle and Eisenhower, and places and names in the news, such as Baton and Guadalcanal. 2 grocery stores, 4 ice houses, a lumber yard, 2 automobile service stations, an electrical fixing shop, and even a dog pound were set up to service this trailer city. A schoolhouse and gymnasium for children up to 8th grade.
Things, and you just did them, and that made life easy for everybody. Things, and you just did them, and that made life easy for everybody. To give you an example of what I'm talking about is, they used to have what they called the porcelain bucket brigade, and that was a chamber pot. So none of the trailers had bathrooms, and even if they did, they had no hookup for the bathroom. They did have a hookup for your sink to take gray water, but they had nothing for sanitary. So you had to utilize the washrooms where the bathroom facilities were located. And so in the morning, you would see all the ladies headed for the wash house with this porcelain bucket to dump it and wash it out and bring it back to the trailer. Well, that was, in the early days, that was only women did that. You know, then finally, I don't know, somebody spotted a man doing one, and pretty soon the wives were beating on their husbands, so then it became anybody's job. And then it finally got down to us kids were doing it. And so in the morning, that was my brother and I's job too. One of us had to take the porcelain pot over and dump it and wash it out and bring it back.
Well, I suppose we had to get up early and have breakfast, because then my brother and sister took the bus to school in Richland, and it was 26 miles round trip.
Go on their way. From 1 to 2 weeks is the average we know. The weak ones turn chicken, the strong make the dough. A transfusion of dust about twice a day, drives all honest thoughts of staying away. You spend a hard day in clearing your slate. You cuss and you damn, then terminate.
Trailerites took great pride in their tiny lots. Seeds and hoses were provided to tie down the desert soil with gardens and flowers. Many adorned their lots with picket fences and rock pathways. Trailers were too small and too hot for long periods of occupancy. Residents spilled into the streets to discuss the day's events with neighbors, while carefully choosing their words, since you never know who may be listening. Children found ways to entertain themselves. Many young entrepreneurs shined shoes or sold soda pop to thirsty workers as they left their shifts.
And they did it right where the guys got off the buses and sold these cold pops just as fast as they could. We had stacks and stacks of Coke bottles empty, and they'd load them up and take them back and get more. And it was constant, almost, every day. And every day these kids were, I don't know what they charged, but it was like double what it should have been at that time, or maybe triple.
And I delivered papers into the trailers, and then I gave that up, and I took a job selling papers in the mess hall. And that was really a lucrative job, or I thought it was. I was just a kid, but newspapers in those days were only nickel a piece, and almost every worker gave me at least a dime.
For camp and construction residents, 25 million meals were served through for camp and construction residents. 25 million meals were served through these mess halls, with the equivalency of 50 tons of food per meal. Entertainment was always available. A movie house ran 24 hours a day, and top-name bands such as Kay Kaiser performed regularly. Entertainers were generally brought in and out of the camp at night, so they didn't get much of an idea of the kind of place they had visited and its location. A baseball field, skating rink, billiard room, dance hall, and library were available to keep the residents' minds occupied on recreation and not on the concrete structures that were rising quickly above the desert landscape.
They provided a lot of inducement to get people to come here.
Because they didn't want people to leave. Because I know my husband said that he wanted to leave a lot of times before he met me because he just got so lonesome.
They realized after they got started in construction, they were losing a lot of people, leaving again. I guess the estimate is something like 151,000 people cycled through the place. And so they realized it was a valued added expenditure to build the auditorium and build the theater, so they would have people stay long enough to finish the place.
Oh, everybody had the same thing. Everybody came from somewhere. And the first thing you always asked was kind of like everybody does today. Well, where are you from? Like, nobody was ever from here.
You had to meet people, and of course everybody else was in the same boat, to meet people, and of course everybody else was in the same boat, because everybody else was coming from somewhere. And there's few people that were home that grew up in the state of Washington, but not very many.
Secrecy reigned supreme. All mail and phone transmissions in and out of the camp were monitored. Supervisors stressed to workers the importance of their mission while not knowing themselves what the mission was. But the workers kept coming, the camp kept growing, and the lines never seemed to stop. By February 1945, when main construction was completed, over 1,250,000 people had made their way through sand.
By February 22nd of 45, the camp was, I can't say abandoned, they moved everyone out. That coincided with the F reactor, which was 7 miles up the river, going critical. And they had a safety law there that nobody could live that close to an active reactor. So at that point, the construction actually was winding down, and they moved people into Richland, or people just moved on to other jobs.
By the time we left, it was getting pretty well, the camp was pretty well emptied out, and there really weren't too many trailers. We were virtually some of the very last ones there. I thought it was so big I had a boyfriend. And it was so sad that day. It was on a Sunday, and his folks pulled out before we did. I was brokenhearted. I can remember that day so well.
short time ago, an American airplane dropped one bomb on Hiroshima and destroyed its usefulness to the enemy.
We have used it in order to shorten the agony of war, in order to save the lives of thousands and thousands of young Americans.
Hanford's contribution to the war effort became apparent when newspapers announced the bombing of Nagasaki, Japan. Only 3 days earlier, the devastation of Hiroshima revealed the nuclear...
The guy that started that noise did a hell of a lot of lying. Deep in the heart of Hanford, there is sand in all we eat. Girls are all bow-legged, the boys all have flat feet. No longer are we religious, we drink, we fight, we curse. No worry about going to hell, it can't be any worse. Still, there was no one to blame but me. The patrol never forgot it. I asked for foreign duty. Believe me, I got it.
Camp Hanford itself may have vanished into history, but its mission lived on. Nuclear power was real, and Hanford became even more important to the security of our nation. Beginning in 1947, and for 11 years that followed, the U.S. government invested more than $1 billion in new construction projects at the Hanford Works project.
From 45, 46, 47, things kind of sat out there. At one of the reports I've read, they said there was a top secret report they'd given to Truman that in 1946 we didn't have enough pieces to have a functioning nuclear weapon. And so it had kind of all been allowed to languish, and when the Russians set off the bomb, that was kind of the call.
An area was needed to house new construction workers. With safety and security reasons making the use of the old Camp Hanford unacceptable, a new location was sought. The small town of Richland was quickly filling up with alphabet-numbered homes, but the need for temporary workers surpassed the pace of construction. A new trailer camp was proposed just 5 miles north of Richland. Unlike the secret Hanford camp, progress of the North Richland camp was announced in full detail by Richland's local newspaper. By January 1948, it was estimated that the camp would house 25,000 people. 10,000 of those would be trailers.
There was a little difference in Camp Hanford attitude versus North Richland during the second. I can remember a guy telling my dad when they were talking about being laid off, my dad said something to me, he said, "Are you going to leave this area, go back to Arkansas?" He says, "No, I'm staying right here."
The layout of the camp mirrored its predecessor, with all utilities and amenities provided for $4.20 per week. Most of the trailer occupants made the best of their situation while they waited for a home to become available in nearby Richland. Yards, flowers, and painted fences decorated the newly established camp.
The people in Richland, they looked down their nose at the people in North Richland because they were construction workers. They looked at them as basically gypsies, things like that. But the vast majority of the people who were out there were family people. They were trying to make a living. They were trying to support their family. They wanted the best for their family just like anybody else. And actually, probably more of those people stayed around and actually took over Richland eventually than the people that moved into Richland in the very beginning.
In June 1955, the Richland Villager announced that the North Richland camp would cease to exist and would be turned over to the U.S. Army. The tiny government town of Richland was now a bustling metropolis of nearly 28,000 residents. A modern city had emerged. Tree-lined streets and identical houses lined the once barren desert. Only a few remnants of its past reminded residents of how far they had come. Richland had much to be proud of. Its contributions to the war effort would live on in the history books, while the memory of trailer life could be summed up by a popular saying, "Remember Pearl Harbor, for you can never forget Hanford."
Far over the mountains my pathway did lead. For days I was hauled by a great iron steed. A short run by bus, my trip was complete. I landed in Hanfordtown, all quiet and neat. The barracks enclosed in a wire-fenced lot, a small room with its dresser and cot. With drink, fights, and gambling, and prayers mighty few, this boom town of Hanford was sure something new. People from all walks and stations of life. The lean suntown farmer from Arkansas, the preacher and lawyer from old Iowa, the godly and wicked and all in between, coming by car, bus, and trailer are seen. The white, the red, black, and brown. These are the people who make up Hanford town. Line up at morning, at noon, and at night. Line up in front, and to left and to right. Line up for paychecks and line up for meals. Line up till you're so tired you rock on your heels. Loneliness, homesickness, worries and cares drowns in a flood of John Barleycorn's wares. The whiskey and gin and rum bottles clink at 20 a quart or $1 a drink. Flowing bowls bring them an evening of peace, watched by the vigilant DuPont police, back to the barracks and into a bed, or flop in the gutter and lies as if dead. Off to the job ere the sun's on its way, eating undercooked grub every day. Sex and lovemaking each turn of the street, labor and toil in the cold and the heat. Blizzards and sandstorms and blisters and strains, sage-covered hills and the parched desert's plains. Look them all over and you'll wonder why these old Hanford boomers are.
To better serve Richland residents and in response to the continued growth of our city, Richland Curbside Collection schedule dates change effective January 2021. Garbage and yard collection will be weekly and recycling collection will rotate every other week based on service address location. To view an interactive map of collection schedules, go to the city's website and click on the Solid Waste Collection Calendar. Then click on Interactive Collection Map. Be sure to click OK on Terms of Use. Then enter your address in the upper left corner and hit Return. From here,
it stands alone among the sagebrush and the sand, like a fortress against the elements. Its windowless concrete walls reach upward into the desert sky. It was the first, one of 3 built during the war, and one of 9 eventually constructed along a 50-kilometer stretch of the Columbia River known as Hanford. It was referred to as the Pile by its workers and was given an innocuous title of 105B, or simply B. But on September 26, 1944, a new science was proven, the world changed, and the atomic era began. It was August 1939, and tensions throughout the world provoked renowned scientist and physicist Albert Einstein to draft a letter to President Roosevelt, informing him of the work being done by Enrico Fermi and Leo Szilard on converting energy from the element uranium. He was convinced that the Germans were working on this same development, and if they discovered how to harness this power first, then the stability of the world was at stake. This new phenomenon could lead to the construction of bombs, he wrote, and it is conceivable, though much less certain, that extremely powerful bombs of a new type may be constructed. From this short letter rose the largest secret war construction project ever. Given the codename Manhattan Project, it would span multiple locations throughout the U.S., cost over $20 billion, employ hundreds of thousands of construction workers, all sworn to secrecy, displace families and communities, and create an environmental cleanup legacy that is still prevalent today. All with only one purpose in mind: to create an atomic bomb. To serve his country overseas in the oncoming war. But when told his efforts would help end the war, and perhaps all wars, he reluctantly agreed. Only weeks earlier, on December 2nd, 1942, scientists led by Fermi and Szilard at the metallurgical labs of the University of Chicago had sustained the first controllable nuclear reaction. It was this reaction that would transform the metal uranium into a new radioactive substance called plutonium. E.I. DuPont Company was chosen as the primary construction company. They had experience in explosives and new technologies, and General Groves was impressed with their management style. When Groves stood before DuPont's board of directors to present what they would be helping the government build, he had the information laid out in front of them with the pages turned down. He informed them that they would be responsible for the most vital and secretive war effort our country has ever known. All board members unanimously agreed without once turning over the papers to see what they had agreed to. In the end, they would build and operate the necessary structures for all costs, plus $1. "33-year-old Army Corps of Engineers Lieutenant Colonel Franklin T. Mathias, who had previously assisted General Groves in the construction of the Pentagon, was chosen to find a site for the reactors asked and make way for a top-secret government project essential to the war effort. Residents of White Bluffs, Hanford, the town of Richland, and even a tribe of Wanapum Indians were evicted in the name of the Manhattan Project. Groves, duly impressed with his young lieutenant colonel, asked Mathias to oversee construction of the Hanford Engineer Works, also called Site W. It was determined that a temporary camp was all that was needed. The only permanent structures were to be the processing and production plants. Living quarters to house the permanent workers would be built in nearby Richland. Construction barracks were built for the men and women who streamed into Hanford with promises of high-paying wages. They were segregated by gender and race, with the women's camp under 24-hour guard. Smitten couples were reduced to holding hands between the fences. Those lucky enough to bring their home in tow or to rent one of the few government trailers available found cozy, or to most, cramped accommodations at the Hanford Trailer Park.
It was an upside-down world here during the construction of Hanford because the physicists and the key engineers were in general very young people. Physics was a brand new science. There was no such thing as a person who'd been practicing nuclear physics or the science of this engineering for 30 years. Just didn't exist. So the experts were very young, often in their 20s, and most of the construction workers were a lot older because the draft was taking men up to the age of 38. So you had a little bit of an upside-down world where the very young were supervising the much more experienced people.
Jobs were easy to find. You'd stop, light a cigarette on a street corner and get 2 job offers.
You just had to be willing to learn and work safely. And that was all needed. They didn't have reactor operators on the circuit anywhere, so they trained you on the job.
It was a different world in the 1940s. First of all, there was abundant trust of the government, normal industry to some extent, although it was exaggerated here. We had a situation where people were told, you're doing important war work, it's out west, and that's all we're going to tell you.
As Camp Hanford grew to over 50,000 residents, so too did the large concrete structures along the Columbia River. The basic design of B reactor was derived from the experimental reactor built at the University of Chicago, albeit with one slight modification. The test reactor at Chicago operated at a power level of 1/2 a watt. B would attain a power level of 250 million watts. B reactor's core would be built as a 3-story assembly of graphite blocks drilled through with a cylindrical lattice of channels into which would be inserted slugs of uranium metal coated with aluminum. 9 metal horizontal control rods separated the channels, and 29 vertical safety rods were available to shut the process down. When the control rods were removed, the uranium would begin a reaction and create heat. Water from the Columbia River would flow through the channels for cooling. When the slugs had been sufficiently exposed, they would be pushed out the back of the core into a cooling pool and quickly decayed to plutonium. Once cooled, The irradiated plutonium would be transferred by special water-filled rail cars to the separation plants. These plants, called canyons by the workers, because of their long, narrow shape, would use chemicals to separate the plutonium from the aluminum and other...
These have got to keep going, and that's when they started doing all the major improvements and trying to figure out how to preserve them longer. The B reactor has a lot to preserve them longer. The B reactor has a lot to say for what it has accomplished.
Since the process of producing plutonium was new and unproven, many construction techniques and procedures had to be invented as it went along. It was noted that the finished blueprints to B reactor were not even delivered to the site until 2 weeks after the reactor went critical.
You talk about having to be innovative. They had to be innovative.
The first chief operator I had when I went to work out there went out to the reactors. And I said, "What's all these pipes?" And he said, "That's your job." He said, "A week from now, I want you to come back and tell me where that pipe came from, where it goes to, and what it did." And that was just the way they taught us. You had to teach yourself. And if there was anything there that you was wondering about, you had to go make a drawing and figure out or make a statement on what it did. And that way you'd come up with different ways to make things better.
On-the-job training was status quo, and safety was always of utmost importance. Procedures were in place for any situation. Each control rod was connected to a sensor that would trigger the reaction to shut down if a problem was detected. This shutdown was referred to as a scram.
Well, actually,
Its second nature is safety. These people who designed and built those machines out there, they didn't have a model to go by. You're going to build a car, you can say, well, what did we do in 1906? What did we do in 1926? They couldn't do that out there. They started by saying, okay, we know this can be done. We're not sure how to do it, but we're going to design and we're going to make sure that there is safety to the environment, to the populace in this area, and to the people who work here. And they did.
Secrecy reigned supreme during the construction project. Groves and DuPont had developed a departmentalized procedure where workers on one part of the construction process...
Well, one of the reasons that for me was, like I said, my father was here as a security patrolman, and he said, just keep your mouth shut and you'll get along good. And you'd be working with somebody one day and he wasn't there the next day, and you find out, well, he said something wrong, and he was just gone.
Well, one way that they proceeded while they were building B reactor was to have compartmentalization. In other words, if you're a person working on the graphite, that's all you're going to know about. And you're not going to know about the pipes, and you're not going to know about the electrical systems. And if you're a thermal hydraulics expert working on the water delivery system,
worked perfect as the power level was increased to 9 megawatts and held there. Then, to everyone's surprise, the reactivity began to slowly decrease. The reactor was shut down, tests were conducted, and a hunt for leaks proceeded. The following morning, the process was started again, and the results remained the same. For the next 2 days, this mysterious loss of power baffled all involved. Then that Friday morning, September 29th, physicist John Wheeler had solved the mystery. It was an unexpected byproduct known as xenon, which was absorbing neutrons and spoiling the reaction. The original design of the reactor pile, devised at Chicago, called for 1,500 parallel channels be made for slug insertion, and DuPont was assured that this was all that was needed. DuPont's engineers, through conservatism or perhaps wariness of MetLab's overconfidence, had added 504 extra channels to the design. The solution was simple: load more slugs into the extra channels and increase the reactivity to override the xenon effect. The fix worked, and atomic history was made.
well, B reactor was the perfect marriage of science and engineering, because pure science was how does the physics reaction work. But engineering was how do you build a machine that can encompass this reaction, encase it, provide a safe atmosphere for it to operate in. And so the engineers at the DuPont Corporation added some extra tubes to the original design that the scientists...
Residents, 8 mess halls, each the size of a football field, 2 grocery stores, 4 ice houses, a lumber yard, 2 automobile service stations, an electrical fix-it shop, and even a dog pound were set up to service this temporary city. A schoolhouse and gymnasium for children up to the 8th grade were located in the main camp area. High school students were furnished free bus transportation to neighboring Richland. All needs were factored in, including 24-hour patrol duty, public health services, fire protection rights, surface streets, 24-hour cafeterias, and weekly entertainment. All part of the critical morale effort as worker turnover was constant. People came from every state in search of work. Most were unprepared for the desert conditions, for the secrecy, the lines, the heat, and the dust made family life far from ordinary.
I'm reminded of the fact that the only way a man could get in the gate, that the fence that surrounded that facility, women's barracks and the women's rec hall, was to be in the company of a woman.